Beautiful and my
Go
sweetheart.
sweet. He had 2 wonderful children, and he's a doctor. All of his dreams were becoming realities, and then in a split second, his soaring life took a nosedive. Andy was diagnosed and became the first American doctor, male doctor, to reveal that he had contracted AIDS through a needle stick injury while he was taking care of a patient. Thank you, Andy, for being here today. How do you feel today?
I feel okay.
Okay. Are there good days and bad days?
Sally, the most difficult thing about this disease is that every day you wake up, you really don't know how you're going to feel. Some days you are very optimistic and are very up, and then the next morning you wake up and you can barely get out of bed. Sure. And that's a difficult part of living with this, is that every day is different, but every day is tough.
Although Andy was diagnosed in 1992, the story really begins a lot of time before that. Tell us about, when was it, 1986?
Well, the story really begins in 1992 for me. In 1992, I was in my own private practice in medicine, and it was actually our anniversary. And the next day, I was very, very short of breath, got admitted to the hospital, and that day, I was admitted to the hospital, progressively got more and more short of breath, and the next morning I found out that my shortness of breath was caused by PCP. And as soon as I knew that diagnosis, I knew immediately what the scenario was, because back in March of 1986, I had a needle stick injury that occurred while I was taking care of a very, very sick young AIDS patient in the intensive care unit. And
when the needle stuck you, did you think of, first of all, had you not taken precaution? Were you wearing gloves? Were you?
Well, in 1986, with the patient in the intensive care unit, to even go in the room, this patient was on precautions. So I went into the room with cap, gown, mask, booties, surgical gown, 2 pairs of gloves.
2 pairs?
2 pairs of gloves, and I was doing a procedure on the patient, and in a split second, a needle that had been in the patient's body came into contact with my left thumb through 2 pairs of gloves. Knew I was stuck right away. Finished the procedure, went out, took my gloves off, washed my hands, saw that there was a little bit of blood there. And I was concerned, more because at that time, hepatitis and other things. In 1986, there were, almost no reported cases of transmission to healthcare workers. Spoke to my physician, who checked the record to make sure that the patient didn't have hepatitis, so that I need to get immunoglobulin. And I went back to work, and that was that.
Did you tell your wife right then and there?
Obviously it was great concern when I was hospitalized and I had PCP, pneumonia, and I knew a diagnosis of AIDS. My wife knew about the needle stick, and obviously, that was probably the most difficult day in our lives, because at that time, here I was in the intensive care unit, had a young son, had a young daughter, and I didn't know if I was going to make it, and at the same token, I didn't even know if my wife had been infected by myself. And those weeks in the hospital intensive care unit, I would say would probably be the toughest time that any family could ever have, so. Because it was not only Judy, myself, my children. It was Judy's folks, Judy's parents, and we were all very, very close. My father, my family, my brothers, my brother-in-law. I mean, we were a very, very close family. And until we knew that Judy was okay and that my daughter was okay, it was a very, very trying time. And at the same time, Judy had to cope with the thought that it was a good chance that I wasn't going to make it. I mean, that's how ill I was at that time.
What about your son? Was he old enough?
Actually, my son was old enough. I'll never forget, that was probably my first uplifting day. He was then they allowed him to come into the hospital. When I was out of the intensive care unit, he came into the hospital, and he's
Lisa, and this is her mother, Linda. Lisa was a preemie, and our audience knows what that is, and received infected blood when she was a couple of hours old, which is a fact that her parents didn't discover for many years. What happened, Linda?
Lisa was a 32-week preemie, and they told us she needed blood to perk her up. They had taken out blood from her, doing tests, and they said, we got to put blood back in. She didn't have any bleeding disorder or any other reason for getting blood. And I, as a healthcare professional, myself, I trusted that this was the correct thing to do. And this was in 1983, before the blood supply was checked for HIV.
We didn't check the blood supply in those days. So how did you find out, and what age was Lisa? What age were you, Lisa?
Well, it was
When I found out,
Yeah.
it was like last year in June.
Last year. But
Yeah.
when did Mother and Dad find
I
out?
found out sometime before then. She'd had shingles, and we wondered why a child would have such a thing. And the pediatrician said, well, it was rare, but it could happen, and to think nothing of it. But again, being in the field myself, I didn't think that was the right answer, and I went further, and a friend of mine who was an immunologist started asking me questions, and she says, boy, when was she born? Oh, 83. Oh, did she have transfusions? I said, yeah. And she says, uh-oh, and let's get her tested. And never in my wildest dreams for any of us could we have imagined this would be the scenario.
So she was 12. Why didn't you tell her? What was the reason?
Well, truthfully, we thought
Can I
very,
ask a
very...
question?
Okay.
Because I think like I wasn't ready to handle it yet. I didn't know enough about HIV to be able to deal with the fact that I had HIV. That's why I don't think my dad told me until like June, because I had to like him had to like lifted brought me up to the place where I was, and I was like asking him, Dad, why do I get sick so much? Dad, why do I get shingles? Like, and none of my friends ever got shingles. Dad, why do I fall asleep in class? You know, all these questions I was wondering. And that was how he decided to tell me, because I mean, I'm glad I know, but sometimes it makes me sad. It's like spooked, you know?
Yeah.
Because, I mean...
What, did you tell anybody when you found out?
Actually, yeah, I did. And then I found out, I called my best friend, my ex-best friend, and I told her.
What do you mean your ex-best friend?
We're not friends anymore. We were best friends last year, we're not best friends anymore.
Why?
Because she couldn't handle it. Her parents couldn't handle it, they were ignorant.
We didn't know she had told her friend, and we only found out a month or two later. When we found out that she told her friend, we said we better speak with the parents. And we brought the parents over, and I do want to say that we did it with the best intention of perhaps answering any questions they might have or reaching out to them so that they could understand the situation and be comfortable. They listened to the story, and the next morning the father calls me up and says, I just want you to know I forbid your daughter to have any contact with my daughter ever again. Telephone or play dates or anything like that ever again.
Lisa, what can you tell other kids to help them understand
Well, I
about
was going to
AIDS?
say, you know, I'm a normal kid, you know. I like to listen to music, I love to dance, I'm an actress, I go to school, I'm in chorus. I like a lot of normal things. Just because I have a teeny weeny thing called HIV, doesn't matter. It doesn't make me very much different from other kids. I'm basically the same, except for the fact that I happen, unfortunately, have to have HIV. And when I found out...
Their daughter, Jennifer, led a fight for 5 years and passed away January 26th of this year. What happened, Kathy?
5 years ago, she was involved with a man. She fell in love with him. She trusted him. Before they had unprotected sex, she asked him if he'd been tested, and he said yes, and he was negative. She was with him, I think, a total of 9 months. And during that time, she realized that he wasn't the person that she thought he was. She found out that he was hiding his drug abuse from her, and that's when she decided maybe she should get tested, because that probably, anyone doing drugs puts you at risk immediately.
Sure.
And so she got tested and she tested positive.
Did she tell you?
She told us the next morning. She told my husband and me. We were engaged at the time, and
You're her biological mother, you're her
Yes.
stepfather.
Yes.
and she called us early in the morning before we went to work, and just dropped the bombshell, and it changed our lives immediately. Linda and I were talking backstage, and she said that she walked around like the Walking Dead or Walking Zombie, and that's how we felt for a long time, and we still kind of feel like that to a certain point.
How did she feel about AIDS, and did she keep it a secret?
Yeah, she kept it a secret. She told her best friend, like Lisa told her best friend, and Jennifer's best friend told everyone in the small town, or enough of the people that she ran around with.
It's a very small town.
Very small town. And Jennifer was devastated. I mean, that was the ultimate betrayal for your very best friend in the world that you'd grown up with, you'd known since you were 2 years old. To do that when you trusted them was something that important. So after that happened, she didn't tell anybody for a long time. She wouldn't allow us to tell my parents. She would not tell her father.
Kathy, you brought something with you that Jennifer wrote. Can you share it with us?
Her list.
Tell me about the list.
Well, she had a big wish list, a big dreamer, very creative, and she kept thinking about all these things she wanted to do, and she really couldn't decide. So I said, look, take a few minutes and write a few things down. Well, by the next morning, she'd been up all night, and by the next morning,
She made a list.
we had a list of about 80 different things that we needed to do pretty quick. So, thank God a lot of them we already had a chance to do. But a lot of them involved getting out of wintertime in Kansas City and moving south for a little while. So we spent a lot of time in New Orleans and Los Angeles. And she had a silly little thing on here, if I can
Sure.
I talk about?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There was a silly little thing on here she had about halfway down the list about going to the Roseanne show. And, you know, and I'm putting little check marks on here saying, well, yeah, we can do this, we can do this. And I put a check next to go to the Roseanne show. And she said, no, that's the silliest thing. I just wrote that down. I called the people at the Roseanne show. They were fabulous. 2 phone calls. As soon as Roseanne had her baby, we went out to the show.
Aww.
And it was fabulous. And they treated her like a queen, and she had a great time.
On behalf of everyone in the audience, there and here, we give you our condolences.
Thank you.
Because Jennifer just recently passed away. And her health got much worse in January. Catalogs. Not a stretch for the imagination, of course, when you see him. Tom has been HIV positive for 13 years. Tom, you know, when we do a show like this, they give us a card and it has some facts and figures on it. And Tom is also founder of the Open Your Heart Foundation in Oklahoma City. When you were diagnosed with this,
right?
You perceived that it was a former lover. Is that how?
Well, what happened was I've been exposed since 1983, and we talk about teenagers today and being sexually active. We all know how it's transmitted.
Right.
But I was more or less had met someone in 1983 also that that I've been with since then, the past 13 years, the same person. But this person in 1983 had actually exposed me, and in 85, I was asked to go to the dermatologist because something had popped on my foot. I'd seen a movie called An Early Frost. I don't know if any of you remember that movie. It was the first AIDS movie. And the doctor escorted me out of the office, would not touch me. I mean, I had to go get the test. And
He said, I can't.
Yeah, and I knew him for a year. I mean, I knew him for a full year. And so when I was escorted to the office, I had told my companion and 2 of my friends, we need to go test. And they says, you know, that we're not going to get in Oklahoma. It only happens in San Francisco and New York. I mean, we're fine. And I was, you know, 16 at the time. So when I found out over the phone anonymously over the phone, "You're HIV positive, call this number for more information, you're going to die within a year," you know, that was all I had. And now with my foundation, Open Your Heart, HIV testing and counseling, there is more support, there is more compassion in America that, you know, you just don't get told you're HIV positive and then, you know, you're left to deal with it on your own.
So we don't, that's dark ages.
Yeah,
for
but
us.
yes, definitely,
Now you
definitely.
have to, if a doctor wants to HIV test you, he has to give you information and then obtain your consent.
Exactly.
And you have to be comfortable with the information
that
given.
didn't happen.
Yes, and it cannot be over the phone, and that is like part of the certification of becoming an HIV testing and counseling center, is it cannot be done over the phone because of the psychology that goes along with finding out you are positive.
Tom also lost a great many friends.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of friends of this disease. Being that I tested in 1985 and hearing some of the stories that I've heard today, you know, I am HIV positive, and my heart goes out to those people with AIDS and the ones that do have to suffer to get up in the morning and so forth. But my message is about living life for today and not worrying about tomorrow, because no one negative or positive is promised tomorrow. We have to like relish the moment we have today. And when we speak of friends, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine who we buried, my companion who exposed me, who was my absolute hero, the one who exposed me, because I watched him live with AIDS, and I watched how he dealt with each opportunist infection, and he never once was bitter. He seized the day, he lived with his family, he was happy, even with all the horrible disease that comes with it. And when we finally buried him, a friend of mine, a girlfriend, who we were very close over that 13-year time period, would tell me,
One tremendous love for Africa. Cindy went to Africa in search of realizing a lifelong dream, and what she didn't foresee was the dream would change her life forever. Cindy has been living HIV positive since 1990. How do you think you contacted HIV?
Well, I went over there and started a business where I take people on safari. And in my exploration out in the bush and riding local transportation, I was infected with meningitis. So I ended up in a very primitive hospital in Central Africa, and we think that that's where I was infected. I did not have a blood transfusion, but they don't have proper sterilization techniques all the time. They understand it, but they don't always have the resources to get what they need. And there was an epidemic, 400 people died. I made it through. I had IV drip and injections of antibiotics and things.
But you had blood, did you?
No, I did not. But the needles, we think, were shared among people. And most, not most, but many, a large percentage of people in Central Africa are HIV and AIDS infected.
What was your first reaction?
Well, I came home here and I had been warned already, go home and get an AIDS test. And I did 6 weeks later when I got home from that particular trip. And the next day I found out that I was positive. And my reaction was to run back to Africa and hide. I didn't want anybody to know. I have 2 grown sons. And
President of the Morgan Agency and founder of Proof Positive Division that represents Cindy and Tom. And how many models totally?
We are up to about 65 currently, and we have over 1,000 on file worldwide.
The first modeling and talent agency in the country devoted to people with HIV and AIDS. Do they get enough work? There's never enough, right?
There's never enough work. We'd like to see more work. What we're really working on now, there's a lot of companies that are marketing specifically to the HIV community. Pharmaceutical companies, nutritional companies. Then there's a lot of PSAs, which are public service announcements, trying to educate people about the disease. What we're really working on now is focusing on finding mainstream accounts who are willing to use people who are HIV positive and acknowledging they're HIV positive. Tom and Jeanette both are out working with companies who are hiring them just because they're the right model for the job. But it would be great to see someone come forward and say, hey, Nike did it with Rick Munoz, where they came forward and they said, hey, not only is this the person that's going to be used as our spokesperson for the product, but they're also HIV positive.
Bless Nike. Now we're speaking of Jeanette. Jeanette, was that true what I said? This is Jeanette and her 3-year-old daughter, Iman. After Iman was born, Jeanette was diagnosed with AIDS. Jeanette, I said you are a lot of the girls I have on my show from time to time. Now, I don't mean that in an insulting way. It's just you were sexually active when you were 14 years old?
Yes. The first time I had sex, I was 14 years old. And I've always looked a lot older than I actually was, because even at 14, I was like 5'8". So I attracted a lot of older men. And as a result, I was going out with older men, and it was kind of a date rape, what I would say, because I didn't really want to do it, but he kind of overpowered me. He was 22 and I was 14.
Is this the person with whom you contacted AIDS, or not?
I have no idea.
You have no idea. How did you find out? When did you finally get tested?
Well, I was getting really sick. I had always been very healthy as a child. I never got any childhood diseases or, you know, any type of illnesses. And all of a sudden, I noticed I was getting sick. My skin changed. My skin got really sensitive, and it was breaking out. I couldn't go out in the sun for long, or else I would burn. And I had never burned before. And I had a dry cough, and just a lot of different things were happening. And I was thinking, you know, I was really scared. Something is wrong. And the first thing I thought of was I'm HIV positive, because I knew that I had had unprotected sex. And that was the only risk factor I had, because I had never gotten any blood transfusions, and I had never, you know, used any intravenous drugs. The only thing I had done to put myself at risk was...
Throw them or break them, or what are we going to do with them?
We're going to do all kinds of things with them. First of all, Sally, I'd like to salute you and everyone on this panel for the excellent work that you are all doing.
What's Dishes?
Dishes is the modeling industry-based foundation that raises awareness and funds for direct care, education, and emotional support for children who are infected with or affected by HIV and AIDS. And DISHES stands for Determined Involved Supermodels Helping to End Suffering.
Correct.
Sort of tongue-in-cheek, but it works.
No, it's actually very nice. How did this come about?
Well, it's funny evolution, actually. It started backstage at a Ralph Lauren fashion show where a whole bunch of models were sitting around talking about food, as we always do, contrary to popular belief. Models do eat. And with Cindy Crawford, Linda Evangelista, Naomi Campbell, Christy Turlington, a whole bunch of girls, and we were swapping recipes, and I decided to do a model's cookbook. There's where the title Dishes came from. Recipes, models, you know. And I couldn't really get to it, so I decided to give myself a hook to really get it done. So I decided to donate the proceeds to children, and we collectively chose AIDS as an area that we wanted to address because, of course, our industry has been devastated by AIDS. So we chose pediatric AIDS as the area that we would like to support.
What can we do to help you?
Well, we have all kinds of fun events. Well, first of all, everyone should be careful, protect themselves, and watch out for
Thank you for saying that. We haven't
any
said
high-risk kind of activity. Just take care of yourself. That's the #1 message. But also get involved locally if there's someplace where you can go and help out and volunteer and work for the cause. Do it. If you want to do something really fun and crazy, try to come to one of our events. We have these kind of fun, interactive events that are a celebration of life. They're a celebration of family, of children. We try to promote that